A girl dragging 16 hours of fluorescent lights and minimum wage behind her stumbled out of a supermarket on the edge of closing time and did the one thing her exhausted brain had been promising her body for the last 4 hours. She stopped thinking. The black sedan was at the curb. Dark, sleek, expensive in the way that certain things are expensive without announcing it. She didn't check the plate. She didn't check the app. She pulled open the door, dropped into the cool leather interior, and let her eyes close before the door had finished shutting behind her. For approximately 11 seconds, everything was perfect. Then she felt it. The particular quality of a silence that belongs to someone who has been watching you and has decided, for reasons of their own, not to speak yet. Cassandra opened her eyes. He was already looking at her. Not the way a rideshare driver looks at a passenger, not with the mild, professional disinterest of a man doing a job. He was looking at her the way a man looks at something unexpected that he has not yet decided what to do with. So, unhurried. Green eyes the color of something that had learned patience the hard way. His shirt was white, open at the collar. And climbing from that collar, up the side of his throat and across both hands resting in his lap, ink. Roses and skulls, detailed and deliberate, the kind of tattoos that are not decoration but record. A history written on skin. A life that did not apologize for itself. He was not a driver. The city moved past the tinted windows, indifferent, continuous. Neither of them spoke. Cassandra's brain, 16 hours behind on sleep and approximately 4 years behind on good luck, ran the calculation quickly and arrived at a number that frightened her. She had no idea who he was. He had no idea what she was about to cost him. Not in money. Roman Thorne had more money than he had found uses for. And something he had no name for yet. Something that felt, in the 11 seconds of silence before she finally said, "This is not my car," like the first thing in a long time that was entirely beyond his control. Before we go any further, if this opening pulled you in, leave a like so more people find this story. Subscribe for new stories every week. Now, let's find out what happens when the wrong car turns out to be exactly the right collision. The car was moving. That was the first thing Cassandra's brain registered. Not the leather, not the silence, not the man in front of her. The city was sliding past the windows at a speed that meant they were already several blocks from where she had made the worst decision of her exhausted life, and the door beside her had the particular stillness of something that had been locked without ceremony. She sat up straight. The movement cost her body filing a formal complaint against the sudden end of the 11 seconds of rest it had just discovered, but she sat up straight anyway because Cassandra had learned early that the most dangerous thing you can do in front of a dangerous person is let them see you calculate. She looked at him directly through the mirror. He was still watching her with that same unhurried attention, his hands relaxed in his lap, the skulls on his knuckles catching the passing light of the city. Up close the tattoos were more detailed than she had first registered. Roses threaded through bone, names in scripts she didn't recognize, a geography of violence rendered in permanent ink. The throat tattoo climbed to just below his jaw, which was set with the casual certainty of a man who had not been told no recently enough to remember what it sounded like. He was, objectively, the most physically imposing person she had ever been accidentally seated next to. Cassandra pointed at the window. "Stop the car." Something moved in his expression. Not surprise exactly, more like the recalibration of a man encountering a variable his model had not accounted for. "You're safe," he said. His voice was low and even, the voice of a man who had learned that volume is for people who aren't certain they'll be obeyed. "I didn't ask if I was safe," Cassandra said. "I said stop the car." The silence that followed had a different quality than the first one. Roman Thorne looked at her for a long moment. The city continued its indifferent passage outside the glass. Then, almost imperceptibly, the corner of his mouth moved. He had met bold people before. People who performed fearlessness for an audience, who calculated the bravery they could afford and spent it carefully. This girl was not performing, and that is what moved his heart. He considered himself a lion and was always looking for someone with this confidence to match him. He stopped the car and tried to get her number, but she ran off before he could get it. The morning light in Cassandra's apartment was less of a sunrise and more of a tired intrusion, illuminating the peeling wallpaper and the stack of medical bills sitting on the kitchen table like a mounting threat. She was stirring a pot of thin oatmeal for her mother when a sharp, authoritative knock echoed through the narrow hallway. Expecting a debt collector or a grumpy neighbor, she swung the door open, only to find the hallway transformed into a high-end delivery bay. Two men in impeccable black suits stood guard beside a rolling rack of silks, cashmeres, and wools that looked like they had been plucked from a Fifth Avenue window. Behind them, a man in a pristine white toque held a thermal case that smelled of sautéed garlic and expensive saffron. "Mr. Thorne sends his compliments," one of the suits stated, his voice as flat as a ledger. "The wardrobe is curated to your measurements. The chef will prepare a 3-course meal for you and your mother. We are also instructed to replace your current furniture by noon." Cassandra looked at the labels: Prada, Chanel, Loro Piana, names that felt like a foreign language in a room that smelled of generic detergent and illness. She looked at the chef, who was already eyeing her cramped 2-burner stove with professional disdain. A cold, sharp clarity settled over her. This wasn't a gift, it was an acquisition. Roman Thorne was trying to buy the right to feel like a savior, treating her life like a project that needed a better coat of paint. "Wait here," she said, her voice deceptively calm. She disappeared into the kitchen and returned a moment later, not with a thank you note, but with a scrap of paper torn from a grocery bag. She handed it to the lead suit. "What is this?" the man asked, blinking. "An invoice," Cassandra replied, crossing her arms. "Mr. Thorne interrupted my sleep, blocked my hallway, and insulted my ability to provide for my family. My hourly rate for dealing with billionaire ego is $200. Since you've been here 15 minutes, tell him he owes me $50. And tell him to take the clothes. I can't pay my business school tuition in silk, and my mother doesn't eat charity." She closed the door before they could respond, the silence of the apartment feeling heavier and infinitely more expensive than it had 5 minutes before. He came on a Thursday. Cassandra didn't see him at first. She was on Register 4, which was the register with the drawer that stuck and the scanner that required a specific angle of persuasion on certain barcodes, and she had developed the focused economy of movement that comes from doing a precise job in an imprecise environment for long enough that the inefficiencies become a kind of fluency. She was good at her job. That was the thing Roman noticed first, standing at the far end of the cereal aisle in a white shirt with his sleeves rolled to the elbow, tattoos visible, entirely incongruous in the fluorescent ordinariness of the supermarket and apparently unbothered by this. He watched her work the way he watched things he was trying to understand rather than acquire, with patience without agenda, the way you watch something that keeps surprising you. She handled a price dispute with a precision that was neither cold nor accommodating. She helped an elderly man with his bags without being asked and without making him feel helped. She caught a billing error 3 transactions before the customer noticed and corrected it with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who considers accuracy a baseline rather than an achievement. Roman picked up a box of something from the shelf beside him without looking at it. He placed it in a basket. He moved to her register. Cassandra looked up when the items reached her scanner and her expression did the thing he was beginning to recognize. The brief recalibration, the decision not to react, and then the absolute continuation of exactly what she had been doing before. She scanned the box. She told him the total. He said, without preamble, "Why do you work this hard for this little?" The woman in line behind him went still. Cassandra looked at him with the even, assessing gaze of someone who has been underestimated by people with considerably more social grace than Roman Thorne and has developed a comprehensive response to it. "Why do you work this hard for money you can't spend in one lifetime?" she said. She said it the way she said everything, without performance, without apology, the flat honesty of a woman too tired for anything else. Roman paid for his items. He picked up his bag. He came back the next Thursday. And the one after that. He never bought anything he needed. He was shopping for something the supermarket didn't stock. It started because he followed her home again and she was too tired to pretend she hadn't noticed. She stopped on the pavement outside her building, her grocery bag from the end-of-shift discount rack in one hand, her keys in the other, and she turned and looked at the black sedan idling at the curb with the patience of something that had decided waiting was beneath it but was doing it anyway. She knocked on the window. "You can come up," she said, "or you can keep sitting out here like a problem I haven't solved yet. Either way, I'm making dinner." He came up. The apartment was small in the way that is not apologetic but simply accurate. A kitchen that required one person to press against the counter if another needed to pass. A table with two chairs that didn't match, her mother's medication organized on the windowsill with the same system she applied to the medical bills. Roman stood in the middle of it in his expensive shirt and looked at the life Cassandra had built inside these dimensions and said nothing, which was the most honest thing he had done in her presence. She made rice and eggs and the kind of simple food that tastes like someone meant it. She set 2 plates on the mismatched table and sat down, and he sat across from her because there was nowhere else and because she suspected he wanted to. She asked him what his empire returned. He looked at her. "What?" "ROI," she said. "Return on investment. You put in violence and loyalty and years of your life. What comes back?" He named a number. It was a large number. "That's revenue," Cassandra said. I asked what comes back. She gestured at the apartment, at her mother's medication on the sill, at the business law textbook open on the counter. "Everything I invest in here returns something I can keep." "What do you keep?" Roman looked at his plate. The question sat on the table between them like a third person neither of them had invited. He had been asked about his empire before. About its reach, its rivals, its architecture of fear and obligation. Nobody had ever asked him what it returned to him personally. He didn't have an answer. Cassandra ate her rice and let the silence do its work. Outside, the city continued its expensive indifferent noise, and Roman Thorne sat at a mismatched table eating simple food and felt, for the first time in a long time, the specific discomfort of a question he could not buy his way out of answering. The call came on a Sunday. Cassandra was at the kitchen table with her business law notes and her mother's revised medication schedule when her phone lit up with the number she had not saved but had memorized without deciding to. She looked at it for 2 rings. Then she answered. Roman's voice was different. Not the low controlled instrument she had come to recognize. Something underneath it had shifted, the way a building sounds different when one of its load-bearing walls develops a crack. He said his mother had a fever that had been climbing for 18 hours. He said his personal physician had visited and left with the particular haste of a man who understood that delivering bad news in that household required careful exit planning. He said he had 4 men outside her door and none of them knew what to do with a sick woman who was asking for water in a voice that had gone small. He did not ask Cassandra to come. That was the thing she noticed. He simply told her, the way people tell things to the one person they have decided, without quite admitting it, to trust. She brought her mother's good soup recipe and the instincts of a woman who had spent 2 years navigating the medical system on behalf of someone she loved. The estate was everything the apartment was not. High ceilings, silence of the expensive kind, staff who moved through rooms with the careful visibility of people who had learned that being noticed carried risk. They looked at Cassandra with the particular expression of people encountering something they couldn't categorize. She didn't notice. She was already at the bedside. Elena Thorne was smaller than Cassandra had expected. 70 perhaps, with Roman's eyes set in a face that had once been striking and remained dignified. She looked at Cassandra the way sick people look at strangers who approach without fear, with a careful, provisional hope. Cassandra checked her temperature. Asked about her symptoms with the direct practical kindness of someone who considers competence its own form of comfort. Adjusted her pillows. Sat with her. She did not treat Elena like the mother of a dangerous man. She treated her like a woman who was unwell and deserved attention. Roman stood in the doorway for a long time. His mother fell asleep holding Cassandra's hand. He watched this and felt something he had no existing category for, something that had nothing to do with obsession or acquisition or control. Something quieter and considerably more permanent. She found out on a Wednesday, which was already a difficult day. The university's financial aid portal had been generating the specific kind of administrative silence that Cassandra had learned to distrust. No payment confirmations, no pending balance notifications, no automated reminders from the collection system that had been contacting her with the regularity of an unwanted subscription. She had assumed a processing delay. She had assumed a system error. She had assumed everything except the thing that turned out to be true. The bursar's office confirmed it in under 3 minutes. Her tuition balance for the current semester and the 2 preceding it had been cleared. Not deferred. Not restructured. Cleared in 3 wire transfers from an account registered to a holding company whose name she did not recognize and did not need to. She knew one person whose money moved through holding companies. Cassandra sat in the plastic chair outside the bursar's office for a long time. The students moved around her in the particular current of people running between obligations, and she sat still in it and felt the specific anger of someone who has been helped without permission, the kind of help that arrives already shaped into a cage. She had told him about the tuition once. Once, at the mismatched table, in the context of explaining why she worked the hours she worked, as data rather than confession. She had not asked for anything. She had never asked him for anything. That was the point. That had always been the point. She called him from the university steps. He answered on the second ring with the particular stillness of a man who knows a conversation is arriving and has decided to receive it standing. She did not raise her voice. Cassandra had her mother's gift for delivering the most serious things in the quietest register. She told him what she knew. She told him what it meant, not to her finances but to her. To the 4 years of split shifts and discount groceries and the careful independent architecture of a life she was building with her own materials on her own terms. She said, "You don't get to buy my story and call it kindness." The silence on his end was long and honest. He said, "I was trying to help." "I know," she said. "That's what makes it worse." She hung up and sat on the university steps in the afternoon light and looked at the city Roman Thorne's money moved through so easily, and she felt the full weight of what it cost to want nothing from someone who had everything. They took her on a Tuesday, which was her short day. She had 40 minutes between her last class and her shift, a window she used to walk rather than take the subway, a small economy of both money and sanity, 20 blocks of city air and the particular freedom of moving through a place on her own terms. She had done it every Tuesday for 2 semesters. Which meant someone had been watching her for at least that long before they decided to move. The car was black, which was almost insulting in its lack of originality. There were 2 of them, which told her this was a message rather than an execution. You send 2 men for a message, you send 1 for the other thing. She filed this information carefully in the part of her brain that had learned, across 6 months of Roman Thorne's world bleeding into the edges of her own, to think in these calculations. The man who met her in the warehouse was not what she expected. Older. Neat. The kind of dangerous that had long since stopped needing to look dangerous. He told her his name was Carver and that he had no particular interest in harming her. He was interested in Roman, specifically in the portion of Roman's operation that Carver believed belonged historically to him. Cassandra was simply the most efficient way to communicate urgency. She listened to all of this with the focused attention she gave to lectures. Then she told him she knew about the ledger. Carver went still. She had found it 3 months ago, accidentally, in a folder Roman had left open on his laptop during one of the evenings at her kitchen table. A document she had understood immediately and photographed with the same quiet instinct that had made her document Angela's bruises, that had made her keep receipts and invoices and records her whole life, because Cassandra had always understood that information is the only currency that cannot be taken from you. She did not have the ledger with her. She told him precisely where it was not, and precisely what it contained, and precisely who else would receive it if she did not walk out of this warehouse in the next 10 minutes. She was home before her shift. Roman arrived 40 minutes later, ready to dismantle the city block by block, and found her eating dinner. She told him to sit down. She told him she had handled it. The look on his face was worth every Tuesday she had ever walked those 20 blocks alone. The war was already being arranged when Cassandra stopped it. Not with force. She had no force in the conventional sense that Roman's world recognized. With a spreadsheet. 12 pages, formatted with the precise economy of a woman who had learned that a well-constructed argument is harder to dismiss than any weapon, laid on the kitchen table beside his coffee on a Thursday morning with the matter-of-fact delivery of someone presenting a business proposal rather than an alternative to bloodshed. She walked him through it without drama. The cost of the war, not in moral terms, she knew better than to lead with moral terms, but in actual ones. Logistics, attrition, the attention of law enforcement that would follow, the legitimate investments he had quietly begun making over the past months that would not survive the scrutiny a territory war generates. She had built the case the way she built every case, from the numbers outward, letting the arithmetic carry the argument so she didn't have to. Then she showed him the other column. 3 community schools in the neighborhoods his operation had run through for 15 years. A small logistics company, legitimate, seated with restructured assets. A foundation incorporated cleanly, that could absorb the transition of funds over 18 months in a manner that tax attorneys and not criminal prosecutors would oversee. She had consulted nobody, had built the architecture entirely from her business coursework and her own considerable instinct. And it was, Roman recognized with the eye of a man who had structured complex operations his entire adult life, extremely good. He looked at the spreadsheet for a long time. He asked her why schools. Because, Cassandra said, you cannot launder a reputation with money alone. You launder it with time and with what you build in the places you previously took from. The schools would take 3 years to matter. In 3 years, she said, they would matter more than any territory he could win in a war. Roman sat with this. Outside, the city conducted its ordinary commerce, indifferent as always to the decisions being made above it. He had built an empire on the principle that power was taken. He was being asked, by a woman who had never taken anything in her life, to consider what it looked like to build something instead. He closed the spreadsheet. He made a phone call. Not to his lieutenants. To a lawyer whose number Cassandra had already placed at the top of the page. She poured him more coffee and said nothing because the numbers had said everything already. 1 year is not a long time to rebuild a life. It is, however, exactly long enough to begin. The firm had been Cassandra's architecture from the first line of the incorporation documents. Her name on the founding papers, her vision in the mission statement, her insistence that every dollar that passed through their accounts could be traced to something that had been earned rather than taken. Roman had provided the seed capital and the particular network of a man who knew where every body was buried, which in legitimate business translated, surprisingly efficiently, into knowing where every opportunity was buried instead. The 3 schools were open. Enrollment was at capacity. A journalist had written about the foundation in terms that mentioned Roman Thorne's name once, briefly, in a context that required no further investigation. Cassandra graduated on a Thursday in May, which felt appropriate. She crossed the stage in the specific way she did everything, without performance, with complete attention, the flat, practical grace of a woman who has earned exactly what she is receiving and knows precisely what it cost. Her mother was in the 3rd row in the good coat they had found at the consignment shop, her medication stable now, her color better, her eyes bright with the particular pride of a woman watching her daughter complete something she had been building for years at considerable personal expense. Roman was beside her mother. He wore a suit the color of charcoal, well cut, the collar buttoned to the throat. The tattoos were there if you knew to look, the roses and skulls present beneath the fabric, the knuckle ink just visible at the cuff. He had not removed them and she had never asked him to. They were his record, his history. A life did not become legitimate by erasing what it had been. It became legitimate by choosing, consistently and at cost, what it would be next. He stood when she crossed the stage. Her mother stood with him. Afterward, outside, in the particular light of a Thursday afternoon that had decided to be generous, he handed her the company's first official business card. Her name. Her title. The firm's address, which was a real office now on a real street. Partner, he said. Not boss. Not benefactor. Not the king of anything. Cassandra looked at the card for a moment. Then she looked at him, at the suit, at the visible ink at his cuff, at the green eyes that had watched her across a back seat one exhausted night and decided she was worth understanding. Don't be late Monday, she said. Roman smiled. It was the unhurried smile of a man who had finally found something worth being on time for. She was still holding the business card when he kissed her. Not dramatically. Roman Thorne had spent enough of his life being dramatic, and Cassandra had never had the time for it. It was quiet and certain, the way he had learned to do most things in the year of sitting at her mismatched table and being remade, without ceremony, into someone she could stand beside. His hand came up to her face with a gentleness that would have surprised anyone who had known him before she got into the wrong car. She let him. That was its own kind of answer. Her mother, 3 feet away, looked at the sky with the diplomatic interest of a woman who had excellent peripheral vision and chose not to use it. Around them the graduating crowd moved in its happy current. Photographs and flowers and the particular noise of people celebrating arrivals. Nobody noticed the man in the charcoal suit and the woman in the graduation gown standing still in the middle of it, the city spread out behind them, one chapter closing with the clean finality of a well-balanced ledger. When they separated, Cassandra looked at him with the same even, assessing gaze she had turned on him in the back seat of a car she had never meant to enter. You're still not my driver, she said. No, Roman said. I'm your partner. She considered this. Then she tucked the business card into her pocket, took her mother's arm, and walked forward into the Thursday afternoon light. Roman followed, not ahead, not behind. Beside her. Exactly where he had finally learned to stand. And that is where we leave Cassandra and Roman, not at the beginning of the danger, but at the beginning of something considerably harder and considerably better. If this story held you from the wrong car to the right ending, give it a like so more people find it. Every like puts this story in front of someone who needs it today. Subscribe for new stories every week. Unexpected collisions, unlikely love, and the people nobody saw coming. Share this with someone who believes the wrong turn sometimes leads exactly where you were always supposed to go. And tell us in the comments, whose story are you here for next? See you in the next one.